Okay, let's talk about logical fallacies and cognitive biases. So these are problems that good empirical research are aimed to address. So we said that logic and evidence are the twin pillars of science. Logical fallacies are errors in reasoning, illegitimate arguments, or irrelevant points. They're fallacies because they lack evidence needed to support their claim. And cognitive biases are common distortions in memory, reason, or decision making. So what does this have to do with research? Well, research methods are designed to counteract logical fallacies and cognitive biases. It doesn't make them immune from these problems, but they are things to avoid. So here's Graham's hierarchy of argument, showing that we can identify different kinds of logic, from weak logic to strong logic. So the very weakest logic that Graham identifies is just name calling, calling people names. Really doesn't refute the argument. Another weak form of argument is ad hominem attacks. So attacking the characteristics of the person or authority of the writer or speaker without addressing the substance of the argument is a very weak form of argument. A small improvement is instead of attacking the speaker, responding to the tone of the argument. Again, if we don't address the substance of it, we really have not made a strong counter-argument. Contradiction simply states the opposing case, but provides little or no supporting evidence for it. But at least now we're getting closer to a substantive argument. A counter-argument contradicts the initial position and then backs it up with some reasoning and or some supporting evidence. So I'm contradicting another argument, but providing some support for this. Better than that is what Graham calls refutation, which finds the mistake in the original position and explains why it's wrong, often using quotes. So so-and-so said this, and this is why it's wrong. But the best form of argument is refuting the central point, the substance of another position, explicitly. Okay, then there's this many infographics on the internet that describe logical fallacies. I like this one. It's actually interactive. You can ask it, what is your logical fallacy? It's kind of fun. But let's take a few that are really important for empirical work. So some examples of logical fallacies. I mentioned the ad hominem argument, where you're criticizing the speaker or the author and ignoring the position. So ad hominem is Latin for to the person. So you're arguing about the person, not the issue. A straw man argument exaggerates your opponent's position in order to make it easier to criticize their position or knock it down. Begging the question is another logical fallacy that involves a circular argument in which the conclusion is already contained in the premise of the statement. And then we also have reasoning by assertion, which I've mentioned before, which relies on a series of assertion or claims that have no supporting evidence. Here's another little infographic I found on the web evaluating logic and evidence, and it suggests that in the middle are sound argument and conclusions. Peer-reviewed science sometimes meets those criteria, sometimes doesn't. That's an important point here. Peer-reviewed research is not always based on sound logic and credible evidence. It's generally better than other sources, but not entirely reliable. The bottom circle, things a healthcare entrepreneur says, things that someone who is selling you something says, have not close relationship between sound argument and conclusions. Again, things that you read on the internet have very little overlap with sound argument. And then this author says that what Dr. Oz says has absolutely nothing to do with sound argument and conclusions. That in and of itself is an ad hominem argument. Might be accurate, but it is an ad hominem argument. So that in itself, putting what Dr. Oz says out to the side, is by itself not a good form of argument. Okay, then there are these cognitive biases, another kind of problem. These are things that we often fall into in trying to make sense of the world, and there are many of these. This is an infographic that will define 24 of them for you. I'm not going to go through it in detail because there's a better graphic. This is in Wikipedia that classifies cognitive biases. So in cognitive psychology, many biases, common errors in thinking, have been studied and cataloged. This is one, I think, very useful way to catalog those biases. You can go to this place in Wikipedia and click on it, and it will explode and give you definitions of each of these kinds of bias. But I think, oh, here's the comprehensive list and definitions. Way more than you need to know for this class, but a really nice piece of work that shows how many ways we can be wrong in our thinking. And maybe more useful to you is to understand that cognitive biases are mistakes in reasoning or memory or decision making. And in this infographic, this one we saw here, they're divided into 4 categories, which I think is really helpful. So they're biases that arise because of too much information, not enough meaning in the information that's provided to us, the need to act quickly, or the limitations of memory. Now let me give you some examples of this. So those are basically the conditions that lead us to use bias in reasoning or decision making. So here's a summary of the main categories. When we have too much information, we have to sort of selectively pick through it. We can't see everything at once. We can't evaluate everything in front of us because there's just too much there. So how do we do that? Well, selectively, we tend to notice the things that are already in our memory, things that are repeated often. We tend to notice striking differences instead of subtle differences, or details that confirm our pre-existing beliefs. We also tend to notice flaws in others more than flaws in ourselves. That's called attribution bias. So here the main point is that when faced with too much information, which is basically all the time, we have to selectively attend to some things and not others. So the process of attention is in itself selective. Another condition that leads to cognitive bias has to do with when there's not enough information in front of us to make sense of what we see and hear. So here we tend to fill in the blanks, to connect dots that are not connected. So we tend to find stories and patterns that connect unrelated details, filling in missing information, often with stereotypes. So for example, we imagine that people or things that we are fond of are better than other people or things. We simplify numbers to make them easier to think about. We think we know what other people are thinking, so we fill in the blanks. We don't understand why somebody is doing something or has a funny expression on their face, so we make up an explanation. There's not enough information in front of us, we fill in the blanks. That's inherently biased because we are making up information. And what we choose to fill the blanks in with really comes from our own mind, not from the thing we're observing. We project our current mindset onto the past and the future, not just onto other people, but we sometimes think of the past from today's perspective, and we think of the future as if we're in our current mindset. When we need to act fast, act quickly on the information at hand, we operate on certain biases. We tend to favor simple options and complete information over more complex options and ambiguous information. We often try to avoid mistakes by preserving our own autonomy and status. We tend to avoid irreversible decisions, even if they would be better for us and others, simply because they're irreversible. We tend to complete things we're invested in. We favor immediate and reliable courses of action over action that's going to produce long-term uncertain results, and we favor actions which we think will make an impact. But these are all biases. In terms of memory, we edit and reinforce memories of the past, discarding specifics to form generalities, generalizing from past experience. We tend to reduce events and lists to their key elements, salient elements, and we store memories differently based on how they were experienced. So positive memories and traumatic memories are stored differently. One of the most important biases in human experience is confirmation bias, and that's the tendency to accept information that supports our beliefs and reject information that contradicts our beliefs. We've known about confirmation bias for at least 400 years. Take a look at this cartoon. Confirmation bias. Cognitive biases also often use what we call heuristic devices, or learning tools that help us act quickly but rely on selective information, not the whole picture. So this often is a response to having too much information. So the availability bias means we tend to rely on easily available information, what's right in front of us, instead of thoughtfully searching for all relevant information. The recency bias means we over-rely on recent experiences over distant past experiences. And then anchoring bias means that we tend to over-rely on a prominent example or anchor. It focuses our thinking, and we use it as a heuristic, as a learning device to make reference to other things. So there's one important anchor. But these all are biases that can lead to errors in reasoning. Here are some others. Attribution bias is the tendency to attribute other people's problems to individual or intrapersonal causes. So other people's problems are caused by them, their faults, character flaws, and we attribute our own problems to external or situational factors. My problems are not my fault, they're because of my situation. It's a very common bias in reasoning. Authority bias is the tendency to attribute greater accuracy to expert opinion and to be influenced by that opinion, regardless of its content or merit. So, for instance, Dr. Oz, because he's a doctor and a celebrity, has a lot of influence over some people, while in fact much of what he says has no scientific or logical basis in fact. Social desirability bias is an interesting phenomenon that is very important in empirical work. It's the tendency that people have to over-report their socially desirable characteristics or behaviors, to overemphasize the things they think other people will like, and to underreport socially undesirable characteristics of behaviors. And then we have selective perception, also thought of as an expectancy effect, which is the tendency for our expectations to affect what we think we see. Now, this is sort of the rationale for the placebo effect. If I think something's going to happen, I'm more likely to perceive that it has happened in the future. That's all for now. Thanks.